Okay, folks, here we are, presentation 2, week 10, leading and managing change. Last time we talked a little bit about some of the roles of change and why change management was important. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about a specific model for change management. What are some of the elements that go along with that piece of change management and leading change? If you remember right, back when you took your organization development class, there were a couple of models that were there for organization development. One of those was the Kotter framework, which had 8 specific steps to it. We're going to be talking about that. There was also Lewin's model of unfreezing the organization, making the change, and then refreezing the organization. There's also some discussion about where does resistance come from? Why do people not like change? What kind of things are going to keep change from happening? And we'll also take a look at some of the process decision tools. When you think about decisions that have to be made at key elements, key steps, what are those? And you remember back from our decision-making class, we talked about the specific styles of decision-making. And the key element, of course, is to always ask if there's more information available. If it's going to make a difference in the decision that you make, then ask for it. If it wouldn't make a decision anyway, don't worry about it. Don't ask for the information. But it's important to be able to identify those processes that you're going to use. One of the things that we want to take a look at is an integrative model of change. When we think about integrative, we're thinking about how does it incorporate all the things that we've talked about so far, right? Personality, leadership abilities, the models of leadership, the conflict management styles, because there's going to be a lot of conflict anytime you have organization change, and those kind of things. So Kotter's put together this framework for change leadership, and it's been taken a look at in well over 100 companies. And that awareness for change and that urgency to develop that change are based on the open systems model. And the open systems model is the model that states that organizations operate in an environment that has various elements to it that require them to adapt to the change, right? So what does that open systems model look like? Well, here's an example, right? You'll notice that around the outside here, we have various things that are going to drive change, right? Various things are going to drive change. Technological advances, we've got government, right? What kind of government things do you think would change an organization? Well, rules, laws, maybe a new set of requirements that you have to go with. Maybe there's some environmental concerns, environmental rules that an organization has to respond to. Imagine Monsanto if they came out with a rule that said you can no longer change the genetics of a plant. They would have a big challenge there. Suppliers, if a supplier provides a specific raw material to an organization and suddenly they go out of business, then you've got to respond to your supplier, right? Stockholders, if they're purchasing or not purchasing your stock. Employees are also a change element, right? Employees not just from do we have enough or not, but what about the right mix of employees? Do they have the right skill sets and the right training? Legal systems, right? What about new rules and regulations regarding contracts? Are there elements there that are going to be a challenge? Competitors, what are our competitors doing, right? Think about the cell phone industry or energy industry. There's all kinds of competitors now, not only from within the oil industry, right, the competitors there, but also now there are all these different kinds of energy creation tools, solar energy, wind power, nuclear power, all different things. So sometimes they're inside the industry, sometimes they're outside. The economic conditions, think back to 2008. What were the economic conditions that drove some organizations to change? Consumer groups, are they providing enough information for the organization to make changes to their products? And of course, there's union changes, right? Changes in unions. And you'll notice here that you have on the inside, we have our inputs, we have our transformation processes, and our outputs. Now, every organization has inputs at some level, whether it's students like at CLU, or whether it's raw materials such as wood for making a cabinet, whatever it might be, there are inputs. When you think about services, right, like a hotel, what are the inputs for a hotel? Well, the inputs are a customer. Customer comes into the hotel. Well, what would the desired output be? Hopefully a repeat customer, right? So what happens from the time they become a new customer to the time they become a repeat customer is where you have that transformation process, right? Something happens to them as a result of spending time at that hotel, or as somebody is buying something, and that output is going to be a new customer, a new perspective on that. Think about a school, an education system. What are the inputs? Well, the inputs are the faculty and the students and the technology, right? And what is the transformation process? Well, how do we put those things together? And what are the processes that happen to get output students, which are graduates, right? Now, along the way, we have to get this feedback. And the feedback will dictate whether or not we change our inputs or not. Do we change the processes? Do we change the suppliers, right? In other words, as a university, we think that we've got plenty of students, but what if suddenly we drop down a half of the students we had? Well, we're going to have to figure out how do we get more students back? Where do we get the supply of new students from? Well, we'll have to change maybe our requirements to get in, right, and open that up. So we have ways of changing that based on the feedback that we get from the students. Now, you as an organization might say, we get feedback from our customers because they're either buying our product again or they're not, right? So again, a lot of different things to consider when you think about the open systems model. And change, particularly Kotter's change model, is derived from the open systems model. So as I mentioned, it's been observed in over 100 companies, and its task is to create a new vision, right? A new vision of what we're going to look like as a result of that open systems model. We get information from all these different areas. Think about the most recent social change requirement, right? Such as sustainability and the greening of America. We like to have sustainable products. In other words, we don't like to have to waste them and throw them away. We're trying to get sustainable strategies, right? So we might have a vision around that, whether it's a vision to change the way we manufacture plastic water bottles or educate students. Maybe we are trying to cut down on the impact that students have. You guys are taking online classes, right? As a result of a vision that the university has to be able to provide online classes here. So again, driving that change is going to be important. Now, Lewin came up with his change model, which was relatively simple. Unfreezing, making the change, and refreezing. Doesn't sound tremendously exciting. The unfreezing is, of course, getting the organization ready for the change, preparing them for it, making up the vision, implementing the change, and then getting that change to stick. How do we make it look in a circle now? So we're going from a square to a circle, right? How do we get it to re-institutionalize? Well, Kotter said there's more to it. He said that in the unfreezing stage, you've got to create a climate for change. You have to increase the urgency through a compelling future vision or a negative perspective on if we don't change, this is what it's going to look like, right? You get your guiding team together, which is the ones that are going to be your strategy developers, and you get the right vision nailed down. It has to be, again, SMART goals, great, specifically what is it going to look like, how are we going to be better as a result. Then in the change effort, that's where you engage and enable the entire organization, right? You communicate for buy-in. You want to make sure that you have provided that compelling vision so people see the value in it. You empower that action. You give people the freedom to put the new change in place. And of course, you create and you celebrate short-term wins, right? So that helps people get engaged and motivated to continue on with their change efforts. And finally, at the back is don't let up. Continue to push for the change. Make it stick. Reward people for once they're in that change, and make sure that they understand the value of what they contributed to that change effort. Kotter's framework also had that compelling vision, right? He had a vision of putting this change model together, and that communication of that compelling vision was absolutely crucial. You've got to engage and empower members of the organization to act on the vision. You've got to enable them to do it. You've got to provide them with the freedom to help with the change. Just by saying, hey, we're going to change, but you can't spend any money, you can't make the changes happen, those are going to be a challenge as well. You've got to support risk-taking, right? There's going to be some challenges that are going to have to happen, and people are going to have to make those risks, right? We talked about bigger change equals greater risk. Well, you have to understand how much risk are you willing to accept as we move forward toward that change. You have to change the structures to allow action. Sometimes communication can be a barrier. If you have a specific structure in the organization that perhaps is getting in the way of that change, you've got to be able to realize what the challenges to that are and be willing to change that structure. And get the obstacles out of the way. Could be a motivation obstacle, could be a training obstacle, could be financial resources, whatever it might be. It's important to get those obstacles out of the way so that the organization can move forward. You also got to develop and recognize key successes, right? Those key smaller successes are milestones on the way, and make sure you recognize when people achieve those specific milestones. It's important to be able to celebrate those small successes as well. But you've also got to be able to recognize the challenge. As the change effort starts, you'll notice over here we have a high level of energy. But as time goes along and people start getting used to the change and seeing successes, energy will start to wane. And you've got to somehow, around this point here, figure out how are we going to move this back up again and re-energize the workforce in order to sustain that change and continue getting that change value there. The longer we spend on a change, the less time we seem to have for that change to happen. So we've got to be able to realize at this point, right, and those milestones, keep your finger on the pulse of the organization. How are they going to help us to re-energize that organization? So how do we apply the Kotter model? Well, I've set up a short acronym, if you will, a mnemonic, and it's called ADDIE, A-D-D-I-E. Stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate. And of course, you'll notice that it goes in a cycle, right? First thing to do is analyze, conduct a needs assessment of the change. What do we need for the change? What kind of things are going to be required? You design the change. Here's what's going to have to happen at these specific steps. You develop the framework around that. Then you implement the change, right? Whether it's through training, whether it's through financial resources, whether it's through eliminating positions, whatever it might be. Then you evaluate it. Did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? Or should we go back to the beginning again and look at it? And more often than not, the organization that is willing to go back and reanalyze the requirements will be the one that says, yeah, we can continue on and continue to fine-tune the change and make more efforts and continue on. So somebody needs to keep their finger on the pulse of the change to make sure that it's moving in the right direction. So Kotter had this model, but what are some of the challenges to it? Well, think about it. Are those 8 steps in the right order? Should the buy-in come earlier? What about a compelling vision? And that's the key element to it, is be able to come up with the right order of the particular buy-in aspects and the change phases so that the change is achieved in an amount of time that's going to work for the organization and it does not use up all resources. Are there limited applications that maybe this won't work in this particular situation, particularly for a crisis situation and you need to make change happen quickly? You're not going to have time to gain buy-in. You're going to have to make that change happen quick. Are there any steps that are missing? What do you guys think? Maybe there's an additional step that should be in there someplace? When you think about that, and you think about the changes that your organization has gone through, what kind of processes have you seen that have caused change in your organization, and did it work or not? So when change happens, we know there's going to be some resistance. And guess what? That's what we're going to talk about in our next session.